At this point, I'd like to introduce Emrys Treasure. Emrys is a biological scientist with the U.S. Forest Service Eastern Forest Environmental Threat Assessment Center and the USDA Southeast Regional Climate Hub. Emrys is the project coordinator for the template for assessing climate change impacts and management options, or TACCIMO. Emrys also works closely with land managers and planners, information developers, web developers, and scientists to identify and meet technology transfer needs related to climate change. Today he'll be presenting TACCIMO, a tool for assessing carbon benefits and trade-offs. So with that, take it away.
What I'm going to talk about today is sort of twofold. I'm going to give you an overview of what the template for assessing climate change impacts and management options is, and maybe more importantly, why it is. I'll also show you how to use it. I'll give you a demo of the website and some techniques for getting the most out of it quickly. And lastly, I'll step through how to use best available science in a structured way that helps ensure the integrity of the information and the application to which you're applying it. So why? Why do we have TACCIMO? Well, we create as much information in 2 days now as we did from the dawn of man through 2003. This is a quote from Eric Schmidt, an executive with Alphabet, which is now the parent company of Google, which he said back in 2010. And this is really true in general, but it's especially true, I think, with respect to climate change research and science. The volume of information available, the specificity of it, and its relevance has just dramatically increased in the last 15 years, and especially in the last 5. That said, our ability to use and apply this information is perhaps more limited in that we have so many issues we're already dealing with, and a new one isn't necessarily at home with any of our traditional disciplines or much of our formal training. So we're left wanting for a resource of credible, concise, and current information. Well, that's where TACCIMO comes in, and to step you through sort of the concept of what we had in mind when we created TACCIMO as a partnership effort with the National Forest System 5 or 6 years ago. We had this notion that natural resource professionals really are very comfortable with the subject matters that they were trained in and that they work with on a daily basis. But when it came to climate change, a lot of us felt a little bit more like Homer Simpson, perhaps at a little bit of a loss on even where to start. So when a natural resource professional is challenged with a question about climate change related to their work, a lot of times frustration may be the first emotion that we experience. But we have fortitude. We pick ourselves up. We go through the traditional literature review process. We look at the available literature. Can we trust it? Maybe we talk to some experts. And finally, we get to that woohoo moment. So there may be a fair amount of frustration in the interim. The goal with TACCIMO was to give us a better place to start with that question. A web-based resource populated with peer-reviewed scientific literature, including findings describing effects and management options, with reliable and consistent methods that content developers like Lisa up in the cloud can follow to generate information that we can get to easily and to apply to answer our question, leading to that woohoo moment much more quickly and with much less discomfort. TACCIMO includes a wide swath of issues. These are the factors that we address with respect to forests and ecosystems. So as Sarah Wiener mentioned in her presentation yesterday, we're also pursuing a line of work to incorporate agriculture and range issues into the tool, though that's still in development. But we have a real wealth of information on all of these topics, from climate trends to coastal ecosystems and everything in between. Who is using it? This is just a map of where our Google Analytics tell us people are using the tool across the U.S. in the last year. The South is kind of the epicenter of TACCIMO's applications, especially within the National Forest System, as signified by the stars, where we've had direct interactions with those forests applying the tool. Out west, we've also had collaboration with California and the Pacific Northwest regions of the National Forest Service.
Emrys, you're getting an echo.
Yeah, I hear that. See if we can figure
It's been going in and out a little bit. I think audio is coming out of someone's computer as well as your phone.
It could be. I do share an office with another person working on this webinar, so. Is the echo still there?
It's there, but it's quieter.
Dan, this is Sarah. Can you mute me? I'm trying to mute myself, but I'm having trouble figuring out how. It could be the source of.
According to this, you're not on. Try it again.
How is it now?
That's working.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption there. Hopefully that's
Sorry about that.
out. Okay, so yeah, just I guess the takeaway from this slide is the tool has been used and applied in a wide variety of settings and for a lot of different purposes. And I'll talk about some of those in a second, but what's common to many of them is that the average TACCIMO user finds what they are looking for in 10 minutes or less. And in our busy and time-constrained lifestyles, this is really important in terms of helping people gain access to credible information on changing climate and what they can do about it without having a huge impact on their workload and time. A few examples of how the tool has been applied. One of the real drivers behind the content in the tool is land and resource management planning on national forests. So as part of a plan revision, they're required to assess available information on climate and to consider how that impacts their management and the ecosystems that they manage. So that's really provided a huge opportunity to really bulk up TACCIMO's content and offerings. We've also been involved in a variety of climate change vulnerability assessments, including the recently published Southeast Regional Climate Hub Assessment, which is available on the Hub's website, which looks at impacts to working lands and working land issues. State and private level forest management, we've worked through the Pine Map project to produce information about protecting your forest asset in a changing climate, as well with state agencies like the North Carolina Forest Service to produce an emerging forest threats pamphlet for their stewardship forestry program to engage private landowners in discussions that are backed up by the best available science, but speak really to the issues that the private landowner has to address. And of course, everyday use for self-education and a variety of other purposes. All that said, I need to kind of put some guidelines around the tool. It is a literature review and decision support tool, a starting place in that problem structuring process, and a large and growing repository, which means it changes and should be checked periodically if you're using it. What it is not is a decision-making tool, quote unquote, a substitute for local and expert knowledge. We'd like you to use it as a place to begin in an engagement with experts, especially Extension. And it's not all inclusive. We've done a lot of work and there's a great deal of information in there, but there are issues and areas that we've not covered. So to use a picture to represent 1,000 words, don't misuse the tool. It could put you in jeopardy. So I'm going to give a quick demo of the website now. I think that will probably better familiarize you with the tool than the presentation. You can follow along if you'd like. You can go to www.taccimo, taccimo.info, and you will land on the dashboard, which is the page that I'm currently showing. The first thing that I would draw your attention to in the center of the screen is the overview video. So if you don't enjoy the sound of my voice, you can watch this overview video and in just a few minutes get a complete tour of the website led by Sarah Wiener and in her voice. So that's a really great way to familiarize yourself with all the functionality and offerings of the tool. Below the video are some interesting charts and graphs that show you about the current content offerings within the tool. Currently, we have 2,203 publications that have been reviewed. You can see the distribution of the publications by year. So there's a little bit of lag in terms of how we're able to add content to the database. The mode or peak is currently around 2012, but we have content as recent as this year, and going back into the early 2000s and late 90s for some issues where some of the foundational science on climate and its impacts was conducted. We also showed graphs breaking down the content by our factors, so you get a sense for where the information is, animal communities being and plant communities being an area of emphasis, but also vegetation management and management options being a significant component of the content in vegetation management, things that you can do to address changing climate. And finally, the breakdown by region. Much of our early content was at a national scale, like much of the research on changing climate itself. However, as the discipline has evolved over the last 5 years in particular, a great deal more of it is at the regional and sub-regional scale. So even there, we're starting to see a real depth and breadth of knowledge that's more relevant and applicable at the decision-making scale. On the upper left is our navigation. The top navigation is present on every page. If you click on About, it'll take you to a page hosted by the Climate Change Resource Center that covers everything, all the background about TACCIMO and how it was developed, how it can be used, all the good contextual information of the tool. We keep it there. News and case studies is essentially a blog that we maintain that has recent highlights related to applications of the tool. And lastly, a contact form should you wish to engage us or have feedback or suggestions about how the site can be improved. Getting into the meat of the tool, the first link that you would click on is the publications page, which is our repository. It's our bibliography, if you will. It's all of the publications that have been reviewed, which can be searched by keywords. So for instance, we can enter the word carbon and narrow our available sources from 2,203 down to 158. We can further narrow the selections by geographic region on the right. So I'll select the southern region, the South Atlantic, and the South Central to get the full breadth of content available for the South. This gets us down to about 29 publications that are relevant to our criteria. We could further filter by the date if we want to only look at publications published since 2010. We can drag the bar and do that. Now we're down to 16. We can also hover over any of the publication findings links and see quotations that are highlighted from the publication that really speak to the management relevant information that we've highlighted from this particular article. If you wish to search for the full publication, you can click on the search for publication and a new window will open using Google Scholar that will get you back to the full source of the information that we're showing. At any time when you're using the tool, there are 4 help buttons available along the left here. The question mark button will provide you with a PDF that explains all the functionality for the page that you're on, as well as context and definitions. The play button takes you to the video overview for that page. There's the link to the feedback form, which I already showed. And then lastly, a disclaimer that helps lay out some guidelines and user responsibilities for applying the information in the tool. One feature that you have to log in order to access is the ability to export and save searches. So I encourage you to register with the site if you plan on trying to get content out. This is a much more efficient way to do it, as well as the ability to save your searches so you can easily come back and reproduce a search that you may want to revisit periodically. The heart of TACCIMO is the publication findings. So we've read 2,300 publications, give or take a few, and highlighted from them nearly 10,000 findings that we categorize into effects and management options. So this page, the publication findings page, shows us those publication findings. Again, you can at any time hover over the publication link to see the source that we're drawing that highlighted finding from. We'll do the same search that we did with the publications themselves and search for carbon. We'll narrow our results from just under 10,000 down to about 1,000, just over 1,000. But we can do better. Let's suppose that we're really interested in how we can manage carbon. So we'll narrow it to just management options, which will take us from that 1,027 down to 222. And we want them to be geographically relevant to us. So we'll filter the regions. And we'll once again select the southern region, the South Atlantic, and the South Central. That brings us to about 28. You can open the factor pane, which will show you the distribution of that content, and you can see that the majority of it falls into the vegetation management factor and carbon sequestration and growth and yield factors specifically, but there are interactions with other factors, including coastal ecosystems, extreme weather, freshwater ecosystems, plant communities, and soil and geologic resources. It's important to pay attention to those because often that's where trade-offs will exist, and I'll highlight some of those a little bit later in my presentation. You can save the search by clicking the Save Search button. Give it a name that makes sense to you. In this case, we'll just keep it simple with carbon. In the future, this button, Save Searches, will appear, and you'll be able to return to the page and simply click the carbon link and reproduce this exact search very efficiently. You can export the results if you want to take them out of TACCIMO and do some additional analysis with them. You can get them in an Excel format, Word, comma-separated formats. Excel, I think, is probably one of the more popular among planners. They seem to enjoy working in it. So you get the citation, the publication finding, its source citation, as well as the metadata about it in terms of how we've categorized it by sector, factor, category, and region. If you prefer to look at the content in a more annotated bibliography form, we provide an annotated bibliography report. And you can enter the report and then pull up your saved search and export that into Excel or Word formats. And in this particular example, I'll show you the annotated bibliography on a Word format. This can be a great place to start if you're going to do sort of a synthesis and summary of the literature on this topic. That concludes the demo of TACCIMO, and we can come back to it during the Q&A if folks want me to show specific features or functionality. But in a nutshell, that is TACCIMO. It is really designed to be intuitive yet powerful to really narrow the content from a lot down to a little that's most directly relevant to you. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint now. So the question now becomes, what is best available science? How do we know that what we're getting from TACCIMO is appropriate for the question that we have? And there is a framework and a way to think about the science that can help ensure that we're doing the best that we can with it. The three kind of criteria, if you will, that I think about are the accuracy, reliability, or precision of the information, and the relevancy. The first two are fairly easy to explain, and the bullseye and bullet holes here sort of represent that relationship between accuracy and reliability. So you can have both low accuracy and low precision, where you have a spread of information that's neither exactly correct or particularly in agreement. You can have low accuracy in that you're not hitting the bullseye, but high precision in that the information is all grouped together. You can have high accuracy and low precision, where you're getting close to the target, but you have some spread, and then what everyone seeks is high accuracy, high precision. You're hitting the bullseye, and you have a good grouping. So the information in TACCIMO in many ways is structured around this, and that we can think about reliability or precision in terms of the robustness of the methods that were used to develop the science, and we can gain that understanding by looking at the original publication and its methods, and also scrutinizing error bars and other measures of uncertainty associated with quantitative data. Accuracy is also often assessed in the context of a journal article in terms of validation of a model, or how close to the truth did we get in an experiment with a control. Relevancy, though, is, I think, one of the most challenging, and that this is where we have to make a judgment on our part as to how both accuracy and how comfortable we are with the accuracy and reliability, but in what ways can we measure the relevancy. And it comes back to the geographic and temporal scale, as well as how specific the information is. So in thinking about carbon specifically in forests, and how different management practices prescribe fire and timber management as the two examples I highlight here, temporal scale is very important in determining if a source of science on carbon and that management practice is relevant to us. So are we thinking about short-term or long-term impacts? In the short term, prescribed fire may result in an initial loss of carbon. However, in the long term, it may promote long-term carbon sequestration and storage and other benefits, especially in fire-adapted ecosystems. Timber management is similar in that an initial harvest on a site may result in an immediate release of carbon and dramatic reduction in on-site carbon stocks, obviously, because we've removed all the vegetation. In the long term, however, aside from repeated clear cutting, which may have a long-term detrimental effect on carbon sequestration, many of our silvicultural practices, including uneven age management, produce long-term carbon benefits that we should promote along other ecosystem services that the forest provides. So thinking about temporal scale is important. Spatial scale is also very important, and in the context of climate change literature, especially challenging, because at least until recently, so much of what we had was at a very broad national or regional scale. And so we can say things like increasing productivity increases carbon sequestration, and that's true on a landscape or continental scale, and maybe true at finer scales as well, depending on the exact circumstances. But that is not particularly useful in the context of making a specific decision in a specific place or supporting the decision of the landowner in a specific place. When you get down to a more regional scale and look at Southeast managed pine, we can get a little more articulate and think about how extended rotations and silvicultural methods that increase tree growth can rapidly sequester even larger amounts of carbon, and that improves its relevancy, but it's still a little bit removed from the decision at which a decision might be made. You can drill it down to the coastal plain managed pine and still make some kind of general remarks about, well, maybe it's a nutrient issue, and on nutrient limited sites, fertilization can accelerate the switch from a carbon source to a sink following harvest and regeneration. So that makes sense, but it's probably more nuanced than that. Are we on sandy soils? What other conditions need to be considered? How quickly will it switch from a source to a sink? So dropping down to the specific level where the information is maybe more suitable to the content, or to the decision being made, this is where we really need to be cautious and think about, okay, at what scale was this information written and intended to be evaluated? And much of what we have, at least until recently, was at that national scale, and you could find things in the national assessments that say things like 100-year-old oak hickory forest can sequester as much carbon as a young loblolly pine stand, or Scots pine forest can continue to sequester carbon even at age 200. Probably true, but far from relevant if we're thinking about decisions being made in the southeast in a managed pine stand or on the coastal plain. So where we start to gain some traction is looking at, okay, fertilization of mid-rotation southern pine stands has a net carbon benefit. In other words, we're going to sequester more carbon than we will have an equivalent emission from the fertilizer required to do it. That's useful, that's relevant. But getting even more specific, we could say in a specific place, like in Florida, in a slash pine stand, the site returned to carbon, to carbon sink status within 4 years after regeneration, and could potentially sequester carbon at a 50% higher rate than an unmanaged stand. So that really starts to support our decision, our species, our management system. Keep in mind that I've generalized these for this presentation, and there's a lot more detail in the literature and in TACCIMO to help inform them. So, sort of going back to this national scale specific information that's often anecdotal and for example, you have to be really careful with it and how we apply it. Trade-offs are another key consideration and something that TACCIMO is very well equipped to help us address. Maximizing carbon may result in a trade-off of decreased water yield from a forest. Biodiversity may be affected if we are growing a monoculture plantation, and certainly there's potential loss of biodiversity as a result. With respect to timber, extending a rotation could produce leakage, in other words, dead loss and loss of economic opportunity, especially in the context of the next trade-off, which is, I think, the most important, which is avoiding disturbance. And in the context of climate and changing climate, certainly important. Increasing carbon sequestration, longer rotations, for example, or higher density, faster growing trees and monoculture crops could reduce the resilience of the stand and of the forest, while at the same time increasing the cost of disturbance. So a trade-off that's important to consider in the context of maximizing carbon. So if you want to learn more, and I'm imagining you do after this presentation, there are 3 sources I would point you to. The first is the user guide. I've provided some shortened links here that you can jot down or grab a screen capture of. The user guide includes all the methodology about how we produce the content that's in TACCIMO and how it can be responsibly used. The Climate Change Resource Center tool profile, which I showed, includes information a little more concise, but covers many of the same points as the user guide. And lastly, a relatively recent case study that we published on the Taking Action section of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, looking at how the Francis Marion National Forest in South Carolina incorporated climate change into its forest plan using TACCIMO. I think it's a really well done effort on their part, and really touches on some issues that are very relevant to this region, and in particular, longleaf pine restoration and how that fits in adapting to the climate variability and changing climate. And with that, I just want to acknowledge all the contributors to this work. Steve McNulty, our PI, is the visionary for it and has led us to where we are. But many others have contributed to it, and you see their smiling faces here. We're a good group. We like to work directly with our users when the opportunity presents itself to both learn about how they need and can apply climate-related science, and how we can best deliver it through technology like TACCIMO, but also forging partnerships and relationships that pay other dividends as well.